Today is May 25th, 2014, interview between Kira Bender and Colonel Jack Koser, retired Air Force. Did you enlist or were you drafted, and when?
Neither one. I realized that the war was coming and therefore I wanted to be in the service, and I joined the Civilian Pilot Training Corps and got my private pilot's license, then went to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and joined the Army Air Corps Reserve Cadet Program.
Was it your intention to be a pilot?
Yes. In fact, I had my private pilot's license before I got into the Army Air Corps.
On what aircraft were you trained?
Well, I started out in a J-3 Cub. My next airplane was a PT-19 made by Ryan, and then I went into the AT-6 airplane of the Army Air Corps.
How long was your training before you went into action?
After I graduated as a second lieutenant on February the 8th, 1941, I was sent to Randolph and later on to Goodfellow Field as a basic flying instructor. So I've trained a lot of cadets on how to learn to fly until after 3 years I was picked to get into bombers and was transferred to the B-24 program in Fort Worth, Texas, and then later to the B-29 program in Grand Island, Nebraska.
In what major battles were you associated?
All of the battles in the Pacific against Japan where the B-29s were used. That included such things as bombing, laying of mines, and anything else that was required in the war effort.
How do you lay a mine from an airplane, and how does it contact the ship?
The airplane has mines that are put in the bomb bay, which are dropped just like bombs, except they go down into the water and fall to the ocean floor. These are usually placed in fairly shallow waters, and as the ships come over, they trigger off these mines in a random fashion, and sometimes ships can go over up to 5 times before the mine will explode and sink the ship.
Where were you when the atomic bombs were dropped, and did you have prior knowledge?
On Tinian Island, the Enola Gay was located in our group, and even though they had an arrow on the tail for the 509th group, when the Enola Gay went over the target, they had decided to use the Circle R, which is a 6 bomb group insignia, in the hopes of confusing enemy fighters, and it wasn't necessary, but at least in the Smithsonian today, the Enola Gay is there sitting with Circle R on the tail, which was our 6th bomb group insignia.
Was flying the B-29 to your crew's advantage, or would you have rather flown in a different aircraft?
happy to graduate from the B-17 and the B-24 into the B-29, which was the most advanced bomber with the longest range and was the fastest of all the other bombers. And we could go back and forth to Tokyo from the Marianas Islands without stopping.
How long was the round trip?
It usually was between 12 and 14 hours, depending upon the winds and where the target was located. So it varied somewhat, but generally speaking, it was over 3,000 miles a round trip.
What was the mental attitude of the crew approaching the target?
Well, the crew was very apprehensive because, of course, we had on our flak suits and our special goggles and usually our oxygen masks, fearing the worst.
What was the attitude of the crew after leaving the target?
Well, it depended on whether or not the airplane was damaged. If, in fact, we had been hit by flak and had lost an engine or were losing an engine from damage to the engine, then everybody was worried. On the other hand, if you got out without being hit, everybody's very happy, needless to say, and we hardly wait to get out of there and get back home.
After the war ended, how did the troops get back to the United States?
Most of them came back by boat. There wasn't enough air transportation, and plus the fact most of the mechanics and crewmen had already gone home, and everybody was worried about the maintenance on the aircraft. I, therefore, myself, selected to come home by a troop transport.
I understand you were an aide for President Truman. How and when did that happen? Why did they pick you?
Well, this was after the war, of course, and I was stationed in the Pentagon, and I was notified one day to report to the White House, and it seems that they needed some single officers to report to be social aides. And I was single, so therefore I was selected to be an aide, and I stayed in that job until I eventually got married, at which time I had to resign. The reason, of course, for that was that we were on a list of people used by congressmen, senators, and socialites for finding dates for girls, and they wanted to be sure that the men were eligible and nice.
What did you do for President Truman?
I was the social aide. I was there for all parties when I would look after guests, look after their clothes, that is their overcoats and all, and for give them refreshments, show them around where they're supposed to go, where they're seated for dinner, and all the various social functions that would entail.
Personally, how did you interact with the president?
Very well. President Truman had taken it upon himself to check all the people that was aides, and he found out that I was from St. Joseph, Missouri, and he was from Koser, Missouri. Therefore, he took an instant liking to me and even invited me to fly with him on a trip out to Kansas City so I could see my folks. I was very close to Harry Truman and went over and walked down Pennsylvania Avenue with him several mornings. on his morning walk.
I heard the president was a whiskey drinker and played poker. Were you involved in any of that?
No, I only drank whiskey with pretty girls, not with the president.
During the military, what were your greatest memories that have nothing to do with battles?
Probably my greatest memory is when I flew my squadron of B-29s to China to deliver supplies to a prisoner of war camp. This was the day before the armistice was signed, and it was up in China, and where we dropped all kinds of supplies to the prisoners of war. Unfortunately, where our bomb bay doors were damaged by the pallets when they dropped out one time, and we had to land in Okinawa for repair and more gasoline. That particular mission was over 22 hours, so it was a much longer mission, and this was a mission where I had selected people to go that had never been on a bombing run or anything before, and it's quite exciting to them.
After a mission, and you returned, how much time before you had to leave for another?
It varied depending upon the urgency of the mission. I usually had 24 hours, so as you have plenty of sleep and recuperation before a mission, but sometimes it might be as long as 2 or 3 days.
If it was 2 or 3 days, what did you do in your free time?
I usually went to the beach and laid on the beaches with the pretty nurses.
What was the ratio to the men and women?
There were 500 nurses on the island, as I recall, and probably around 40 or 50,000 men.
Can you add anything further to that?
Nothing that is good for print for young girls.
Thank you very much.
All right, sure.
Thanks, Jack. That was great.
I hope that's what you wanted.